Okay, we're finding the derivative of e to the xy power is equal to 8y. Okay, using implicit differentiation. Okay, when you use implicit differentiation, you find the derivative of both sides. But remember that if you find the derivative of anything with a y, you have to slap a dy dx after it. Okay, also notice in this problem, on the left side, you have e to the xy. Okay, that's an outside function. And then you have xy, which is an inside function. Okay, so we have to use the chain rule. Okay, also notice when we find the derivative of the inside, when we're finding the derivative of xy, we have to use the product rule. So it's kind of complicated, but we can do this. Okay, so when we start finding the derivative on the left, okay, the derivative of e, like e to the x, is just e to the x. So the outside derivative is e to the xy power. Okay, now we got to take that times the derivative of the inside. Okay, the derivative of the inside function is x times y. Okay, so we're going to take the derivative of the first times the second plus the derivative of the second times the first. Okay, so the derivative of the first, the derivative of x is 1, okay, times the second is just y, okay, 1y, okay, plus the derivative of the second, okay, the derivative of y is 1, but we have to put a dy dx after that, okay, times, okay, the first, which is just x. And you know what? It would look better if that x was in front of it right there. X dy dx. Okay, on the right side, the derivative of 8y. Okay, the derivative of 8y is 8. But then we have to put a dy dx after that. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit. Okay, e to the xy. Okay, 1 times y is y. Okay, I'm just going to recopy it so I can see better what we're doing. Okay, now before we get all of our dy dx's on one side and all of the other terms on the other side, we're going to have to multiply this. We're going to have to expand this. Okay, e to the xy times y. Okay, I'm going to write that as y e to the xy. Okay, then we have e to the xy times x dy dx. Okay, I'm going to write that as x e to the xy dy dx. Okay, the other side's the same. 8 dy dx. Okay, now we need to get all of our dy dx's on one side and everything else on the other. Okay, let's see. I'm just going to keep my dy dx's on the left on this. So I'm going to keep x e to the xy dy dx, keep it on the left, and I'm going to subtract the 8 dy dx from the right side. Subtract it from both sides, so I get negative 8 dy dx. Okay, on the opposite side, I need to get rid of that y e to the xy. So I'm going to subtract it from both sides. So I end up with negative y e to the xy. Okay, now we have all our dy dx's on one side. We have everything else on the other. So now we can factor out the dy dx. Okay, when we do that, we're going to be left with dy dx times x e to the xy minus 8. Okay, on the right side, we are left with negative y e to the xy. Okay, we're almost done because we got to solve for dy dx. Okay, to get to solve, you want to get rid of the stuff that's multiplied to it. We're going to divide each side by xe to the xy minus 8. Okay, so that's going to make that cancel out. So dy dx is equal to this answer right here, negative y e to the xy over xe to the xy minus 8. Okay, and there's other ways you could write that final answer. Okay, but I hope this helps. Thank you for watching the video.